Give me a second, I'll turn on my camera and get my timer. She, her pronouns, and POIs verbally. I will not be looking in the chat. My speech starts in 3, 2, 1. In society today, a lot of women seek validation through the term girlboss because they feel like it empowers them and makes them better than other women. We don't stand for this. We are so proud to propose. Before moving on to my substantives, let's look at a few pieces of setup. Firstly, what does girl boss look like? We see that women who show power above that of social norms are generally called this, right? For example, if you achieve certain feats in which people perceive only men can do so, you are known as girl boss. For example, becoming a CEO or striving up to be a movie star or a superstar as such, right? Secondly, what will our world look like without girl boss culture? We tell you that women who are perceived as powerful no longer need to seek validation through the term girl boss, right? Essentially, when you rise to the top and when you become a sort of powerful figure in society, you will be perceived as equal as men and not have to seek through the term girl boss. Sure, you can still rise to the top, but you won't have to seek validation through that one term. And we tell you this propagates the narrative of autonomy. You don't have to be influenced by a certain culture to join the workforce and to rise to a certain point. No, thank you. We tell you that this means that there is more likely to make decisions based off their own circumstances. We see that women are rational actors. They can work things out themselves. We just essentially don't support a blanket narrative to presumably empower everyone, when in reality, it ignores the structural inequalities of women all around. We support the empowerment of every single woman in society today, and not just specific women in which you call girl boss. Now, the split in which this debate will occur, I will be talking about how this is only accessible to those who are privileged in society, and secondly, how the term girl boss is misogynistic. And my second speaker will be talking about how this ignores the capitalistic and structural barriers for women in society, and also how this ignores and actively harms women who follow traditional feminine roles in society today. First argument and how this is only accessible to those who are privileged in society today. First level, we see that there are different standards and barriers for women depending on their status in society and their social backgrounds. For example, their race. They could be white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, and lots more, right? We see that racism still exists in society today despite the slowly growing trend in disproving racism and removing racism. We see that it still exists within society and still continues to perpetuate certain groups of women. And we see that still in society today, white women are still perceived as more powerful than Black women. We also see that socioeconomic backgrounds, such as poor people and rich people, change what sort of education women receive, right? What kind of mindset they were brought up in, what skills they attain, and how likely it is for them to join the workforce in the first place, and lots of other different circumstances. We see that most women who are CEOs in society today are still predominantly white women from well-off families. Because of their background, they are able to rise to the top with good education. And we see that this is not necessarily because of their own hard work and because they are considered girl boss. We see that it is merely because of their socioeconomic background that allowed them to rise up to such an extent. We tell you that we are talking about women who have made it in society today and are girl boss. They are most likely women of white backgrounds who have a relatively comfortable childhood. But we see that this is not the majority of women as such. And if we only support a world in which girl boss only brings up women of white culture with a rich background, we tell you that this is not empowerment of women at all. Second level, why is this so harmful, right? We see that girl boss culture likes to glamorize and look up to these groups of women, saying that they are the goal for everyone to achieve. You see a lot of white rich women in interviews getting their perspective on how they manage to rise up the ranks. And then the important thing to note, again, is that these women are likely from well-off families and are from the majority of populations. This means that their experiences are only for those who are the same as them, I'll tell you later, and not those who live in poorer and less well-off families, right? For example, these women who actually essentially say, I rose up to the top because of mere hard work, which then incentivizes people of lower backgrounds to work. But the thing is, structural barriers prevent them from doing so. And we see that because of that, these women are not being empowered within society because they cannot rise to the top. We cannot choose to empower one group of women and call them girl boss, saying that they are the majority of women and saying that they are the ones who are only able to rise to the top, while neglecting another group of women who are way lower, but still equally as powerful, but we don't acknowledge them within society due to the term girl boss only illustrating a certain group of women. We tell you that these women, the white and rich women, are the ones who are flocking the media and portraying this image that if you follow your dreams and you do your best, you can actually make it. This only empowers a certain group of women. You barely hear of Asian women becoming CEOs in society. And even if they existed, they do not get the spotlight because all of the newspapers and magazines and media interviewing these white women who have become CEOs, we say that there is an extremely unfair balance between that. Second argument, but before we move on, I'll take a peek.
Presumably, if you frame that women are rational actors, then they don't compare themselves to people who are at structurally advantaged positions and interpret the narrative in which that is nuanced to themselves. How do you engage?
We see that essentially, even if women don't compare themselves to these girl bosses, they are not being acknowledged within society, which is the main problem in this debate today, right? We are saying, sure, Asian women may feel like they are empowered and may feel like they can be CEOs, but the thing is, they're not being glorified within the media. They are not being called girl bosses within the media as a whole because people don't acknowledge them. Girl bosses are only used to refer to a certain group of women with which we do not stand in society today. Second argument on why the word girl boss in itself provides a misogynistic sense. First level, on what does status quo look like, right? We see that women are generally perceived as weaker, right? They're not as powerful as men. If they achieve feats that are above their social standards, the term girl boss is used on them. Second level, why is this misogynistic? As stated before, it seems like the term is used as two reasons. Number one, an excuse as to why women are able to achieve the same feat as men. It's like a lousy reason as to why certain women can rise to the top while others can't, right? We don't see the word boy boss being used because men already perceive themselves overall as bosses and all of them are able to achieve certain feats, right? Because this is a social standard of society today. But rather the word girl boss is only being used because men want to find an excuse as to why certain women are able to rise as high as them. We tell you that men will not perceive it as a sort of hard work from the woman, but rather because they are girl bosses, right? Secondly, we see that it is a form of validation that women need to seek or achieve to reach the level of men in society today. This word is used as a form of praise towards certain women in which they strive to reach, right? We see that women from below, they will strive to reach and be called girl boss because they feel like it empowers them, right? But the thing is, this shows that you need to be of a certain category within the scope of women for you to be noticed and accepted, right? If you're not considered a girl boss, men will see you as weaker than them. Men will still think, oh, you can't achieve the same feats as us. You're not as good as us. You only need to be part of the group of girl boss for men to properly accept you. We tell you that this is called exclusion of women and not acceptance of women in the world altogether. We tell you that we strive to a world of acceptance and equality for every single woman in society today, not just a group of women who are able to rise to the top while others are being neglected, because this is so misogynistic, because men find an excuse to say that girl bosses are better than other girls. We tell you we do not stand for this inequality within women. This splits women into two groups in which we do not want. We are so proud to propose because of all these reasons.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Now I call upon Leader of Opposition to open the case from side opposition. We're here. You're muted. I'm so sorry, but you're still muted.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Hold on. I'd like to start my speech. Yeah. The importance of feminism lies upon the fact of what kind of power you're able to give to the people who best need the catering of the feminism movement. Women do not belong in just the kitchen. They deserve to be girl bosses. They deserve to strive for the higher intelligence and power without any shame, and that is why I proudly oppose this motion as a girl boss. There will be two pieces of constructives coming from side opposition. First, what are the tangible benefits of the girl boss narrative? And second, why the girl boss narrative is especially important. But before that, let me quickly add three pieces of framing. First, where does it exist? We think that it exists in types of country that we debate on is what they have new waves of feminism. This means that there will be existing structure in place that they will be able to climb up the ladder, and enough women are going to be hired in top position in order to have this narrative going. This is likely going to be countries with enough liberals and politics and in top positions of cooperation. So there is an existing ability for women to climb up the ladder. The reason for this is that in the nation where girl boss has the most impact, i.e. nation where girl boss is an accepted norm, it's likely going to be under the fourth wave feminism, and there is enough perspective for women to progress in the corporate ladder, and there's enough women already in the top position for this narrative to be supported by the general population. This means that the only problem that remains in this nation is the narrative that girls internalize that girls can succeed. Second, I also think that women are a collective group in this debate. This is because even if only white CEOs and white female CEOs climb up the ladder and succeed, this still empowers other kinds of women, right? Third, the definition of girl boss are too limited on SciGov, and we think that it can be said to women who actively choose their own benefits and value their own benefits rather than other ones. And this does not mean that they just have to be on top positions, and they need to have actually to be like successful in career in order to be called girl bosses. I'll engage upon what this looks like later on too. But with that said, I'll be moving on to my first constructive. What the practical benefit of the girl boss culture bring to women later? The problem with women is that there's still the biggest proportion of household parents that they still somehow feel obligated to conform to the toxic standards that men enforces upon them. And traditional households holds a belief that women is there only to do housework. We think that they can get and succeed in a world which is not the case, right? We challenge the stereotypical gender norms on our side that previous waves of feminism and ideas cannot really tackle. And we believe that the entire concept of girl boss prompts women to actually engage upon their own value. This is important for feminism movement, right? And important for the empowerment of female power rather than the empty phrase of such as like girl power, which was stereotypically used to conform to the toxic femininity. On our side, we'll be able to first have women actually pursuing the career, right? Like I have characterized, for too long, women has consistently opted out of a workplace and actually opting into their own career for the fact that they feel like they can only derive value off of like being women and being conformant to the toxic femininity. Right? In our world, women might want to pursue higher education to be like their role model and to be like the girl bosses. We think that it puts less emphasis upon gender norms due to how men will see women as just being capable, lead to decrease in workplace discrimination, domestic abuse, and sexual abuse. This sparks the discourse also, right? Because once women are on top and given attention, they can donate to charities and collaborate with organizations that support the female empowerment. A girl boss narrative is way better than any of the stereotypical narrative on SciGov, which is things like bossy woman and CEO that only wears bright red lipstick and suits, right? This kind of stereotypical narrative will be able to opt it out on site op. Second, we think that it creates social change for women, right? We think that the phrase of girl boss also contributes to things like being a girl boss by speaking up against the gaslighting and opting out of a situation that makes you feel really uncomfortable. This looks like, I broke up with my boyfriend. Wow, girl boss, right? This eliminates the social stigma of things like slut shaming or whore shaming and actively prompt women to choose what they want and best they want and what they strive for in their personal life. In the long run, things like sexual harassment in the workplace, maternity leaves, etc., factors that are unique to women can be addressed by women on top, prompting changes because they have the authority to do so, right? It is important to recognize that one of the biggest and greatest superpowers in the world is aiming to limit women's freedom of choice in the name of outdated traditional values, right? In a world where predominantly elitist government is undermining women's reproductive rights, we need feminism. Third, the diversity of career chased by women and the destigmatization as to their way of pursuing career. What we think is we characterize women in many fields as girl boss, for example, like Michelle Obama, for example, Instagrammers. This makes things like being models, being Instagrammers, doing feminine jobs have no shame and negative implication upon them. This is important because we see women being devalued for using their appearance and having confidence upon the kind of career and the diversity of career that they take on. These are important because A, this creates a venue for exclusively women to help each other out. B, this breaks social norms and gender expectation for women. And C, men are no longer able to belittle women or say that women should live like a traditional woman. We also think that creates better discourse because while not everyone may not be in agreement to the ideas of girl boss culture, its existence still prompts a social discourse as to how the capabilities of women are evolving. Way better on our side that does not support, way better than prop side that does not support and tries to shut down these ideas. This argument is important because we actively oppose the entire stigmatization of women and the kind of harm that you give them by prompting them to be in inferior positions. Second argument then, the importance of the girl boss narrative. But before that, I'll be taking a POI. 3, 2, assuming none, I'll move on. Second, the importance of the girl boss narrative, right? why we think that this narrative is the best narrative in order to spread around. Because first, why this narrative best cater towards the need of the new waves of feminism. We think that the girl boss feminism are adapted to the needs of women in the current society. This kind of cyber activism that are prominent on things like social media are the new kinds of feminism that advocates for the empowerment of women and the empowerment of the general female population, right? This kind of feminism actively prompts women to speak up against abuses, recognize problems like gaslighting, which is things so specific that the previous feminism cannot encounter and cannot be able to speak up on. So this actually, like I said, tackles a side government framing of how they will only have people calling women who are on high position girl bosses. We think that it can also mean that women are going to choose and prioritize their own choices, and we think that this kind of things destigmatizes women, and we think that they will be able to make women's life in the general society and the modern society way better. Second, why you're worse off on the counterfactual, right? Because the counterfactual of regretting is probably going to look like they're going to resort back to previous waves of feminism and the kind of narrative that they push up. This is harmful because it means things like sexualizing yourself or deriving value off of yourself for men in order to validate yourself. These kind of feminism and validation for women is more harmful, and therefore we strongly oppose the takeaway of the girl boss narrative that will inevitably make women rely upon other narratives that is going to be more harmful for them on the long term. Proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Now I call upon the Prime Minister from side proposition to continue the case. You.
Hi, just give me a quick moment. Okay, I'm going to start my speech soon. Give me a quick second to start my timer. And before I continue, again, don't really mind any pronouns. And if you're going to give me PR, please make sure that it's verbal because I don't have time to check the chat. Thanks. And with that said, I will like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Look, Taylor Swift going up on stage and telling you that you can make it if you follow your dreams is, and I apologize to all the Swifties who may be listening, extremely foolish and unrealistic. We see that girl boss culture fails to actually address the issues within the workforce and society and says that as long as women can get successful, there's no issue at all. We do not agree with this, and thus would like to propose this motion. 4 things in my speech today. First of all, refutations against the government side. Second of all, I'd like to talk about how it ignores the capitalistic and structural barriers of women in society. Second, I'd like to talk about how it does not actually solve the issue within industries. And finally, I'd talk about how it creates hostility within the female gender. Okay, going to refutations. We see the term girl boss can be interpreted other ways, other top positions. However, do you really think that men will accept women who do not rise to top as girl bosses? I don't really think that it works there, right? Sure, the term may empower women individually to themselves, but society's opinion of what feminism relies on and the characterization that art provides does not really align with thoughts of men here. Second, they talked about how the stereotypical image of girl boss will be removed by this term. We see the girl boss is stereotypical in and of itself. Despite the opposition characterization, men will still view girl boss as those who rise to the top, those who get the CEO positions, those who wear red lipstick and who like wear these kinds of suits. Stereotypes remain in the opposition society anyway with these societal perspectives. Finally, let me just say that they talked about how men are no longer able to belittle women and say that women only belong in the household. Sure, you're supporting women within a group of women, that doesn't necessarily mean that men will stop belittling them as a whole. We don't really see the connection here. And we also have support that women in the household should be represented in this case. Okay, now let me go on to my points. First of all, how does society ignore the capitalistic and structural barriers for women in society? We say that this whole culture makes it seem that becoming a CEO is an easy thing for women to do in the first place, and that is simply not the case. Even if we just forget about the racial and the socioeconomic disparities of women that Shingy talked about haven't really been refuted against, we see that the struggles of becoming a woman CEO and boss is often forgot about. People praise those who have managed to come over to the top and overcome these barriers, but don't talk enough about the actual problems that women face in these workforce. They want this cute and empowering story about how women have become successful, but do not really want to focus on the actual struggles that they face. The whole point of girlboss culture is to make sure these women are motivated to succeed in the workforce so that they can be successful. This means they do not want to talk about the struggles that they go through, because if these celebrities and CEOs talk about the extreme sexual harassment within companies, the competitiveness within the female gender, etc., it is simply going to demotivate these young women to work in society. Second of all, we say there is a pressure for your peers to stand up to your bosses, for example, because of girl boss. We say this is an extremely hard thing to do, considering your male boss can talk easy, that can very easy talk shit about you and spread rumors around the office. This means that you're pressured to stand up to your bosses and males in companies, and it can lead to you being cut off, docked pay, and even fired in this case. Finally, let me just say that it is simply not possible for women to get this into public attention, because the media does not want to again portray these women as weak, and they don't want to show them as being discriminated against. They want these stories of women being successful and actually achieving change, because it's far more empowering. There are also too many stories and instances of women being fired for unnecessary reasons, and while it's ignored and not talked about, it is also not a big commodity, which is people are used to it, and thus people don't really see any reason for it to change. This is that we have this very shallow sense that if you fail to get past these barriers and of capitalism and misogyny, you do not try to hide them, and thus it pretty much undermines any of the struggles these women actually go through. Second of all, let me talk about how this does not actually solve the problems within this industry. Let's look at the incentives of companies first. We see that because of girl boss cultures, companies are now pressured to hire women and put them into high positions. However, because of this continued lack of women in most industries, and since capitalism and companies still have this structural sexism, most bring on this idea of tokenism and try to show representation by having just one woman in a relatively high position, and they do not really solve the issues that are actually predominant in the workforce. This is the same thing that's happening in the modeling industry right now. We said there's tons of POC models working on platforms like Milan, London, Paris fashion shows, and so on. They use them as tokens to show representation, but models still face discrimination as Asian models are told to slant their eyes even more, or while hairdressers fail to actually properly take care of afro hairs. We see the same thing happens here. Women are in CEO positions, sure, but they do not actually have any changes in sexual harassment. There's so disproportionate amount of job opportunities offered to women, and so on. No matter how successful these women are, people think that the problem is solved because they're in these high positions. We need to know that a CEO again does not necessarily allow for the woman to change the workforce environment either. We see that most companies do not have a single CEO, so the women could very easily be overpowered by the men in the same position. There are also partners and associates that exist in every company, and thus it means that it's very easy for them to overpower the decisions and wishes that these women CEOs want to bring out. We also hear this creates hostility within the female gender, because there's just this one position for women to take, and because because of all this tokenism, and this means that it's far more likely for women to feel this toxic competitiveness among their gender, and thus are pressured to for them to get just that one pay, to get that one bonus, etc. Yes, I'll take a POI. 3, 2, 1.
First, you never solve. First, you never solve things like racism and discrimination on your side either. Second, just because certain women succeeds doesn't mean that we don't get rid of the prejudice that women can never succeed on our side.
Okay, I've already told you how most people are unlikely to address this issue in the first place because of this whole girl boss culture, right? We have told you how people just want this fluffy story of people being empowered. They don't really want to address the core issues because that's going to take too much time. That's going to demotivate these women from actually working out. That's going to demotivate these young girls from actually joining into this workforce and joining and becoming successful. Also on about this whole racism and discrimination thing, we said sure it doesn't really work on our side either. However, it is much worse on your side because you're only completely ignoring this issue and you're only giving this kind of representation to these white women. We say it's far better on our side because there is no representation there at all, and we believe that it's just in general creates a fairer ground. Okay, finally, why does this ignore and actually harm women who follow these traditional feminine gender roles in society? Going on to problem analysis, we see that traditional feminine roles in society are often seen as inducing systems of patriarchy instead of being a free choice of women and their right to act however they want. I think pretty much the LO pretty much concedes this pretty much in all of our speech. This ignores the right of women to think freely and sees that girl boss culture is the only way to break free of societal norms. This is inherently harmful because of the implication I'm going to bring you. First, twofold. One, we see that women will find solace and comfort in embracing feminine roles. For example, coquettic aesthetic, wearing lipstick and pink bows in the hair, etc. And being unapologetically feminine will be seen as though they're left out in society and other women. Second, we say this brings even greater impact because women equality as a whole is only contingent on the internal stability and unity between these women, and because it's the only measure we can uplift each other, this provides mental support to each other. So we gave you a mechanism changer. We say this is the most important part of this argument because it's a retrospective argument debate. We just have to tell you the burden that the harms of girl boss culture is inherently harmful for women. But our countervailing model is that, as she stated, we don't support a world where women's qualifications are determined on a certain term. This propagates a narrative of autonomy. You don't have to be influenced by a certain culture and join in the workforce in order to have a reason to actually see this useful. The impact here is that women are actually able to practice their individual autonomy. This is important because the whole pillar of feminism is to support individual autonomy, whereas women are able to practice whatever they want and do not have these countervailing narratives that make them feel inferior. For these reasons, we think that we can better solve this whole idea of feminism. But for these reasons, we're so proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Now I call upon the leader of opposition to continue the case from side opposition. Here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great, okay. I'll take POIs exclusively through chat. Please don't interrupt me. Cool. And the speech will start. Sorry, my Google Doc is lagging. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. The girl boss narrative is not one in which we tell every single woman they need to be a CEO. Ayaka is a girl boss for not going back to her ex for the 4th time. But for other people, they are a girl boss for climbing up that corporate ladder. It's highly individualized. We get organic change by increasing the perception of women. 3 questions. Firstly, what does a world absent of the girl boss narrative look like? Secondly, which uplifts the expectations of women? And lastly, which is better in fighting the patriarchy and creating societal change? Firstly, then on the counterfactual, I want to flag that this is really important because like any other debate, this debate happens on a scale and it's retrospective. Government then is necessarily needed to defend the counterfactual in a world in which this narrative did not exist. This is why the first 2 speeches are both inherently unrelevant because they never actually engage with the comparative. 4 layers of analysis here. Firstly, what does the counterfactual look like? We flagged 2 in first. This is one where you're likely to prefer things like mediocre lives for women, where a further emphasis on historically how women have been seen to work, like having to stay in the home and having to cook or clean in the kitchen, or other previous waves of feminism that were less nuanced than the current modern needs. Because there's various narratives in society and they all counter each other to create the general conception when you take one away, another one will presumably rise. Why is this then likely? Because the demand for feminist ideology is probably going to exist to a decent degree on both sides because there's structural issues that women face, but on their side, you reverse the current nuanced narratives. Thirdly then, why is our side really good? 2 reasons. Firstly, because we have a counterbalance. Girl boss is currently a counter mechanism to older stereotypes and that neutralizes the line of attack. Secondly, we are a stepping stone to creating structural change. The idea that women can be achieved has to prevail in order for society to think that there is a meaning there's a meaning or a purpose to try to create change for them, and that's the prerequisite analysis to get people to care. Fourthly then, on why is the counterfactual really bad? The counterfactual is bad because you literally take away every single potential of any type of structural change. DPM tries to come here and say you ignore capitalistic incentives or structures. 2 things. Firstly, this is symmetric. On both sides of the house, capitalism exists, but at least on our side of the house, we co-opt these benefits of inevitable capitalism and get people to focus on the achievements that they can get within capitalism and allow for people to feel empowered in the process of doing so. But secondly, this is presumably worse on their side of the house because in the absence, you literally reverse years of feminism where women were considered a literal sex toy or where they were literally considered an object to men. At least when it's girl boss, women feel more empowered in these symmetric harms and process of the type of capitalistic narratives that they want to talk about. It's unclear as to why on their side of the house, they suddenly get structural change. We POI this, there's no mechanism. Secondly then, on empowerment, 2 sections of response here. Firstly, how do individuals react to this narrative? And secondly, how does this uplift women? Firstly, on how do people react? The premise of all of government's argument is that the narrative is only accessible to white girls because they have easier ways of getting in higher positions. Firstly, why are people inherently unlikely to compare themselves or uphold themselves to these extremely high standards? Because as they frame, women are very rational. They don't compare themselves to people who are at way higher socioeconomic positions. So like, look, I don't compare myself to Emma Watson because I don't think why can't I girl boss in Hollywood like her because I'm in a different country and I'm 16 and I have no musical talent. But I do compare myself to the people that are in close proximity to me. The structural reasoning for this is people don't compare themselves to everyone they see and because there is a lack of exposure to them. So because the majority of exposure you have is from the girls that you have close interaction to and the people around you from time to time, like your family members or your peers, those are the people that actually influence you. So even if I see Emma Watson every once in a while, that exposure is significantly less than everything else that I see. Thus, people are likely to nuance this narrative in a way that is beneficial or relevant to their life. And even if they don't, that means the entire case that the opposition talks to you presumably doesn't happen because now no one cares about it. Women reach for success within the reasonable standards they set for themselves when they look at close proximity. Secondly, then on how does this change actions? Because I want to note here that even if I don't compare myself to people who I intuitively recognize I have a different different position too, I do compare myself to people within my close proximity. So if Ayaka's girl bossing at the grand finals of a debate tournament, I look at her and think, I want a girl boss like her too. So I work harder to achieve the type of same achievements that she has. Thus, this leads to three things. Firstly, it means women are more incentivized to work harder and step out of their comfort zones. So even if DPM wants to talk about how women are already in the workforce with privilege, these people are now likely to climb the corporate ladder and make these type of structural changes because they need to girl boss within their capacity. Secondly, even if things are out of your control, that means that even if some things are always out of your control, that presumably just means that there is now a cap on how successful you can be. But which generally just people do understand because of proximity and past precedents. But it then thus means that on our side of the house, you can get really, really close to filling that cap by working hard, and we boost this incentive, which is better than the counterfactual, as opposed to being really, really far from this cap, and therefore having much less success or much less girl boss than you otherwise could have had. It's unfair for government to say some women are just inherently hopeless and you cannot make their lives better. There are always things that people can do if they believe in themselves. There are always small changes you can make within your life. What I want to then conclude this clash on is that we think the girl boss narrative in itself encourages people to be more successful within the reasonable standards that they set for themselves, but it rightly increases the perception of this pull cap and incentivizes people to get really close to fulfilling the maximum utility that they possibly can. And this is precisely the reason why you get social change and you get people to organically make these situations within their proximity better. And that's why women around the world, no matter what type of socioeconomic status they're in, actively are more incentives to empower themselves and uplift their status quo, to go into higher level positions, to try out for their leadership position, to go for the class president. And that's how we get organic change and a narrative shift on a mass scale, no matter which part of the world you are from. Lastly, then, on societal impacts and patriarchy. The first government contention that we get here is that you feed into misogynistic values. Firstly, I want to clarify what this culture inherently looks like. This girl boss culture and men being considered as bosses is not something that is inherent to the human value. It's not inherent that a man always was just born more powerful and that a girl boss ought to meet a man. This means that on their side of the house, there's a massive problem solution mix mass, because it's inherently an issue that we think men are too powerful. So yes, we do not have a term called boy boss, but that's specifically the reason why the term of girl boss is so important. Before I move on to explain this, I'll take a POI. 3, 2, 1. Assuming not, then I'll move on. Then why is it really important that we have the term of girl boss to mix match the one of guy boss? Because now you're actively reversing these gender norms that exist, and you're actively providing the counter narrative towards what we believe is true within society. And you're now spurring discourse around it. You're telling people that they can be more than what society has told them to be, and that there are higher levels of achievement that they can go for, even if it means that they're acting like a male in the process of doing so. But secondly, I think this ties back really well to our first idea about how this becomes a stepping stone. People are now more likely to accept you, and within the hyper-capitalistic narratives that we all have to concede has existed on both sides of the house, women are more likely to uplift themselves into statuses that seem higher, even if that means you act more like a male. That means the people around you are more likely to give you recognition, and you're more likely to get in higher social structures where you now have the capacity to make change. On their side of the house, they have to support older narratives, one in which only women of higher prestige, only one in which white women had the capacity to uplift. On our side of the house, we support girl boss. We think although girl boss may not be perfect, we allow for young girls around the world to not fall into the traps of government, of thinking that there is no hope for them, of thinking that they're inherently not a stakeholder of feminism and that they're hopeless. Because we empower girls, and I want a girl boss, I'm so proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Now I call upon government whip to summarize the case from side proposition here.
Sure, give me a few to set up my notes and I'll start. Thank you. Okay, can I check again if I'm audible? Hello, excuse me, testing. Am I audible?
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. I'll be starting, no wait, I think POIs verbally, just interrupt me anytime. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. We think that the empowerment that side of opposition tries to propose to you is one that's toxic and one that is literally ignorant of the structural barriers of women in and of itself. If Ayaka wants to claim that their side of the house has some sort of girl boss narrative, where even if you're not a CEO, you're still able to still be a girl boss in and of itself, we think regardless, even at their best case, it still brings some sort of structural harm because of the inherent socioeconomic disparities between both stakeholders. In the end of the day, we think regardless of their narrative, they don't solve this issue. But a few points of extraneous rebuttals towards the whole case overarchingly before moving on to my three clashes, right? We think, first of all, I would like to claim some contradictions that were made inside of opposition's case. Firstly, we think that Ayaka framed this debate saying that this should reside in liberal nations, yes, but afterwards they then mentioned that in a world where a government is predominantly taking away a woman's reproductive rights, they need feminism, right? We think these two largely contradicts each other. One says that they want to reside this debate into one that's liberal, another one says that the government is taking away a woman's rights. We don't see what case are they trying to run. Secondly, then we think they also claim that the sexualization of women in and of itself is going to be the countervailing narrative in our paradigm, but we think this is contradictory then to what they said before and how they want to prioritize individual autonomy and no more horror slut shaming, right? We think therefore, if a woman in and of itself feels the need that she wants to be like someone that embraces femininity, we think in the end of the day, this is something that we opt into. We think because of these inconsistencies, it's unclear as to what cases opposition want to run. Henceforth, it shows that their stance is already flimsy from the start. But I have two responses towards their framings, right? First of all, on the framing that the debate resides in a liberal nation, we think this is largely out of the spirit of the motion in the first place. If this debate resides in a nation wherein feminism in and of itself is already supported, then this motion wouldn't exist because girl boss would already be something that's the inherent norm and that minority women are able to rise up the corporate ladder with no structural barriers. I think it's highly unrealistic. No, thank you. Second framing, then they told us that their mechanism then is that women that are able to value their own benefits are those that are girl bosses too. We think that girl bosses in and of itself is focusing on a corporate ladder. They cannot expand this definition, but even if they did want to, they need to defend both definitions because they were the opposition bench, because they challenged us from the start. I'll take a POI before moving on.
You still have to defend why this is better in the comparative, because even if we're talking about developing nations, presumably that's worse on your side of the house when you reverse the trends of feminism to the point where it was actually only accessible to white women because that was the narrative around it.
First of all, we never really said we were defending a trend wherein we're supporting the old traditional mindsets of what women should be. We've already told you since Andrew's speech and even in Singy's speech where we was that our mechanism is that we support the individual autonomy of a woman. But if you want the comparative clash, I'll go into that right after this. We think onto the clashes then. The main metric to adjudicate this debate is whether or not girl boss culture is retrospectively a priority good, right? The round then comes down to three main subclashes, which I'll be analyzing in my speech. First of all, which counterfactual is most preferable while engaged both paradigms. Second of all, which side protects the minority groups prevalent in women. And third of all, which side protects the individual autonomy of the woman. Firstly, on the most important clash, which counterfactual is most preferable. On proposition, we told you that since Singy's speech, we exclusively mapped out in our world building that in our world, individual autonomy is one that we prioritize. And whoever that is benefiting their own individual autonomy, they're seen as empowering based on their own circumstance as a woman. On opposition, they gave you the counterfactual of the girl boss culture. They gave you three main impacts from Ayaka's speech. First of all, they told you the impact that men are unable to belittle women. We said that Andrew gave you reasons why even if they become CEOs, they're still overpowered by the men at the top. But second of all, we're unable to see the mechanistic linkage between the two, right? There was a large evidential link that was needed to be proven to prove the likelihood of this impact. Why then would girl boss culture suddenly lead to lead to men belittling women in the first place? When in the end of the day, there's some sort of gender stereotypes being put onto both. We think that this was just asserted. Second impact then was that they get some sort of societal discourse. We've already told you from the start that we empower them through our mechanism, and therefore this societal discourse is symmetrical, right? We don't think girl boss culture is something that is exclusively the only metric that can provide societal discourse in today's society. There are other avenues in which you can achieve that. We think our avenue is the best one because we tell you that we give them some sort of autonomy over their lives, and we don't need to opt into girl boss culture to get some sort of validation from the rest of society because we think that's inherently oppressive. Third impact, then, they told you that they break gender norms. Sure, you do. We conceded that, but we said that we have this co-opted as well because the moment in which, if a woman who wants to rise up the corporate ladder by their own virtue of their autonomy, therefore they would, the dichotomy then becomes where women who do not want to opt into being a CEO or a girl boss have the inherent would now have the inherent bias to wanting to become another in their side of the house, and therefore it's going to be even more disenfranchising for them in their paradigm then. This is especially true because of Yonwoo's principle of proximity, right? An example would be if an aged woman in a liberal progressive nation, as per Ayaka characterizes, sees her white counterpart friend gets a top spot at his corporation. By the principle of proximity, they feel as though inferior, and therefore then you do not break some sort of gender norms, you only break those who are able to rise to the top. You inherently ignore the structural barriers. You never prove to us why then would these like minority groups be able to rise up. You just kind of assert that it resides in a liberal nation, but we already told you it cannot run like that. But second class then, which side protects the minority groups prevalent in women, right? On proposition, we told you we take away the narrative that propagates a mindset that makes them feel as though they're already unable to live up to standards because they're structurally disadvantaged. Opposition mitigated this by giving a framing that saying that this debate has to reside in a liberal nation. We've already told you this is uncharitable. But on the impact response, even if this were true, that this debate resides in a liberal nation, we think that minority women are still largely disenfranchised socioeconomically as compared to their white counterparts regardless. This means that those minority women who are exclusively financially disadvantaged by virtue of their socioeconomic background, they still cannot live up to their white counterparts then, regardless, by the principle of proximity, they'll feel as though they're inferior to their friends. They never prove how the girl boss culture solves this. They just walk over with a characterization we don't think this can stand. On the last class then, which side protects the individual autonomy for women? On proposition, we told you that women who want to opt into being feminine is able to, and whatever they want to do, like staying a housewife because they feel joy and solace in that, or if they want to climb the social ladder, sure, we think that we protect their autonomy as a woman then on our side of the house. But in opposition, they try to co-opt this benefit by saying that women who make their own choices are girl bosses too. On the thesis, right, we say it's untrue because girl boss culture focuses on the corporate ladder, which is something seen already flagged out. This means that this is a definition challenge that they have to defend on their side of the house. But as I've said before, even if all of this is true, we think the impact still stand because by the virtue of the principle they want to push, we think you still disenfranchise those at the bottom who cannot rise up to the top. So largely as a whole, I would like to conclude my speech by saying that because of the reason that we gave you the counterfactual building and because we gave you mechanisms as to why, even at their best case, you still largely disenfranchise those at the bottom, for that I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I call upon the next speaker to continue the debate. Here.
Am I audible and visible? Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're audible as well as visible.
All right. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The burden on side government comes on two folds when it's a regret motion. Number one is to prove that the world with girl boss culture is bad, but secondly, and more importantly, is to prove that their counterfactual will be better. They say things like individual autonomy for women is going to be supported in their counterfactual. That is the underlying mechanism that girl boss concept is found on, individual autonomy. Presumably without the existence of girl boss culture, there'll be a shift to traditional customs. They have like traditional structure supported, like the kinds of discourse will be on women's sexualization, etc. Therefore, they had to actually contextualize what kinds of like feminism it will look like on their counterfactual. They never did that, and therefore they have no case in this debate. Before I move on to my case, let me just first of all clarify the contradiction, and then secondly engage to whatever the arguments they brought from deputy. First of all, to clarify the contradiction, two things I want to note here. Firstly, our case from Yongwoo is that feminism is necessary in all contexts. So even if there's no reproductive fight, there's likely to be still structural issues regarding females. Therefore, it's likely that there will be an existence of a counterfactual without the girl boss culture. Secondly, all forms of feminism were inherently inaccessible. And the reason for that is because that was when feminism as an idea was less accepted and broad. Therefore, we've clarified the contradictions. Now let me engage their point. So supposing I think Anja brings up this case about like tokenization of women and that there's going to be like one boss who's woman to appease the stereotypes of like girl boss culture. My response to this is that I think if that's the impact that girl boss can actually bring, that is actually a good thing. Because insofar as there's a boss who's a woman, there's more probability of structural changes happening in the corporations, right? Because even if you're there because of tokenizations, they actually have to do something by the pressure of other women in the corporations or by other labor unions to support things like feminism. Therefore, when they have the actual power to change the system from within, even if they're there because of tokenization, we think that that's still better in our paradigm. So we flip the value metric here. Let me then engage on two comparatives of why we win on each ones. Firstly is to prove why we are better for women in traditionally feminine roles. Secondly is to prove why we allow for women to succeed up in the corporate ladder. Firstly, then, why our side is better for the women in traditionally feminine roles. This is presumably their biggest impact and only impacts stakeholders in this debate. Therefore, I think proving that our side is better for these individuals gives us the leverage in this debate. They say in this claim that this glorifies bosses and thus is bad for traditional women. Three responses to this. Firstly, this is just not true. They massively misunderstand the context of how the word girl boss is used, right? I'm going to clarify what those are likely in my later comparatives, but it's likely to be more casual and it's likely to only be used to empower females in context that is not exclusive to these kind of corporate structures. Therefore, we think that the premise of their argument falls. Secondly, even if their premise is true, their logic is just not there. Like the types of women that are likely to opt into these narratives are businesswomen and the ambitious type. It's very likely that the types of women that do stay-at-home moms who are surrounded by similar-minded people, even if they know that there's this trend, would think much of this trend to leave such a detrimental impact on them to begin with. Therefore, it's not very likely that their impact is as severe as they claim. Thirdly, if their whole entire logic is true, and us supporting women in capitalist structure through the use of girl boss comes at the zero-sum cost of these people actively being stigmatized, that if that is actually true, in their counterfactual, where they want to support these types of women that are stay-at-home moms, that comes at the cost of support for women in business, right? If their logic is true. Here's why that's problematic. Two reasons. Number one, the woman in business is suffering more because number one, they have to fight the traditional stigma against women in society, but also fight the corporate structures, right? Therefore, it's likely that the types of women that we support on our side need these kind of narratives more. But secondly, the women who stay at home are likely to have some types of protections that is bigger than women in corporations because they're conforming to the way society expects women to be. Therefore, it's likely that our side stakeholders needs more of this kind of support. With that, then, I move on to a comparative about why we allow women to succeed up in the corporate ladder. So both sides agree that this is an important delta. So proving this wins us the debate, but also because in developed nation context that we talk about, it's likely that the most pressing feminist issue is the problem of the invisible roof. The thesis of this our argument here is that this culture shifts the internalized conflicts within women that prohibits them from succeeding up in the corporate ladder, engaging with their first point. Their point here was that only certain groups of women can succeed in the status quo because of structural barriers that exist. I have a couple responses. Firstly, let me just break down their premise by saying that these structural barriers do not exist. So we told you in frame that it is likely going to be countries with enough liberals in politics and in top positions of corporations, so there's an existing ability for women to climb up the ladder. The structural mechanism that WIP tries to contest that we don't have, I'm going to provide it then. The reason for this is that in the nations where girl boss has the most impact, i.e. nations where girl boss is an accepted norm, is likely to be under fourth wave feminism. And there's enough perspective for all women to progress in the corporate ladder, and there's enough women already in the top positions for this narrative to be largely accepted by the mass. This means that the only problem that remains in these nations is the fact that these girls internalize that girls can't succeed and they choose to be a stay-at-home mom or work in low-paying jobs. Therefore, because girlboss can sufficiently debunk the internalized complex by glorifying women at the top, they don't necessarily contest with this, so I think this characterization is true, means that we achieve the objective of a side proposition by empowering women. So we take today's debate. But even if we suppose our best and suppose that this barrier exists, there's two-way metrics that wins us this debate. Firstly, we win on probability of impacts. Their logic is extremely flimsy. Not all women automatically believe that they have to be bosses in order to become a girl boss. The way it is used in a status quo is to empower other females. So an example of this is I text Yomu like #girlboss as she cuts off negative men in her life, right? Therefore, it doesn't lead to the impact that they talk about. The more probable impact is not discouraging the African-American woman to give up her dream because men tell her that she's not good enough. Our impacts are more probable. Sorry, time. Secondly, then, we win on the magnitude of the impacts that we claim, because their counterfactual isn't better, right? We told you the most likely counterfactual that they have to support is things like sexualization of women or other types of previous forms of feminism characterized by conforming to the general stereotypes men have towards women. The structural mechanism for this is that it is underlined in how girl boss rose to prominence, which was because it was so unique and challenging in preconceptions. Therefore, when their counterfactual says that girls should lean into what the men traditionally considered, this not only disables the vulnerable racial minority women from participating in business that they want to claim about, but it also harms the entirety of women in general from pursuing business. So if both of our sides' impact stands in this debate, the comparative becomes on impact and magnitude, right? Our impacts are bigger in terms of magnitude. So therefore, I told you why, even in their best case, that their argument stands. We went on the two metrics, which was number one, the probability of the impact itself, secondly, the magnitude. For all of those reasons, we think that we are better for the women in the corporate structure, which are the vulnerable women that we should be supporting in this debate. For those two stakeholders, number one, the women who stay at home, and number two, the women that are actually participating in the corporate structure, we are better for both of them, and that is why we took today's debate. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Now we'll move to the reply speeches. I call upon the opposition reply speaker to go ahead and give the reply speech. Here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Great. Okay. Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. The only way you get structural change and change in various areas around the world is to reverse the global idea that bosses can only be men. It's to spur discourse and tell women that they are more than just someone who needs to stay at home. When women rise up collectively, we get change. Two themes I want to talk about. Firstly, how is this narrative likely to manifest? And secondly, which is better for individual women around the world? Firstly, on how this narrative manifests, there's two things I want to talk about here. Firstly, how does this impact women? And secondly, on the counterfactual. Firstly, on the impact, we tell you from first that people inherently don't compare themselves to people who are at overly different statuses because we don't have as much exposure to them, and they're not someone that we know as rational women recognize or in different statuses to us. So yes, we want girl boss when we want you to become a CEO, but we also think that you are a girl boss if you are a stay-at-home mom. And the reason for this is quite simple. It's because on our side of the house, this has become a widely accepted narrative, and it pops up in our daily conversations. It's become highly nuanced and individualized, which is why we consider people that stay at home girl bosses. We consider Ayaka for not going back to her ex 4 times, and we consider other people a girl boss for not going back to toxic men. So people don't suddenly feel pressure to become Emma Watson or become the next CEO of Google because there's structural barriers and they recognize that, but rather this is an individualized narrative that incentivizes people to get out of bad situations or find better ways of exercising autonomy within their daily capacity. Then what exactly does the counterfactual look like? We win the counterfactual clash for 2 reasons. Firstly, on a technical level, all 3 speakers fail to prove 2 things. Firstly, why the counterfactual that they want to support is likely. Why is it that women suddenly get autonomy and women's rights in the absence of this narrative? This is never structurally proven. But B, they never give the clear differentiation between what is the difference from being a girl boss and supporting that and giving women autonomy. Because structurally speaking, the underlying logic under being a girl boss is that we give back women these years of autonomy that they have lost. And presumably girl boss also includes things like wanting to get people autonomy, but we do it in a way that is more nuanced and that is more co-opting the inevitable consequences of things like capitalistic structures. And so we do the same things that they want to do, but in a more effective and time-wisey way. Secondly, we win this clash because we give you structural mechanisms. We tell you that the counterfactual is likely to look like reversed forms of feminism for 2 reasons. Firstly, the further ingraining of ideas that women ought to stay at home because that's the past narrative. But B is that you have more things like older waves of feminism in the absence of this one, because the framing is that if you take away this new wave of feminism, you presumably go back to the old one. But let's be insanely charitable here and say that on our side of the house, only the top of top CEOs become a model girl boss. We tell you all the way from first that this is still a good thing because that's a stepping stone and they're still inspirational. So people work hard to reach that cap. The only challenge that we do get that on this is from the whip. But unfortunately, all 3 speakers still failed to prove the likelihood of the counterfactual, which means that their case automatically just becomes a wash. Secondly, then on which is better for individual women. The crux of our case here is quite simple. Firstly, it's that people nuance this narrative to find things that are empowering within their life and make better autonomy. Secondly, that the counterfactual is really bad because that's when in which feminism in itself was inherently very top down because it was a newer concept and it targeted only upper class women. So if they wanted to talk about accessibility, girl boss is clearly the more accessible alternative. The only response we then get here is that this isn't just about liberal democracies. 2 things I want to flag. Firstly, our case doesn't rely on it having to be a liberal democracy for it to fly, because presumably if you're in a developing nation and you still don't have things like fundamental rights, this liberal narrative probably won't affect you anyways, and that's the line of analysis analysis and logic we give you that never goes structurally responded to. But secondly, this is still better than the counterfactual because girl boss narrative is still more widespread to the past forms of narratives of feminism that we've seen, and thus there's still a higher likelihood of it transferring and trickling down into a way that it ends up becoming a stepping stone into a way that it benefits even more marginalized communities or women that are in developing nations as well. It's unclear as to why this is better than the counterfactual. On our side of the house, we take down other existing narratives that tell girls that they cannot be leaders, and they internalize this, which is why they don't raise their hands in class, they don't try out for student council, and they don't ask for that raise. We tell women that it is okay for them to girl boss, and we take away the years of marginalization, and we allow for them to actually be happy and content in their life. I'm so proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. Now I call upon the final speaker of the House, government reply, to go on with the reply speech here.
Okay, give me a quick sec, thanks. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the opposition managed to run a very sugar-coated case, and trust me, I should know. Ayaka, Young and Rio have all managed to get me to agree with their very questionable decisions by dipping in honey and saying, it's okay. But even so, make sure that you're not misguided by their fluffy case. Girlboss sounds great. Who doesn't want to be considered a powerful female rising against the systematic oppression that we face every day? Yet, when we see comfort in such a word, we fail to really address the core issues of the world we live in today. Rio even came up here and said that women do not have this systematic barrier that stops them from being girlboss. Now, I'm actually disappointed in you. I think this entire sentence managed to encapsulate the world we live in. Because of this culture of girlboss, men do not see the struggles that females have gone through, and this perception of women that are coasting through life manages to pervade. The main thing I want to bring up in my speech today, which is actually better for women and the feminism movement overall. We see that as long as we prove this main clash, we win this debate, right? Okay, feminism as its core works on a few stances, but the most important to consider in this debate is first, the unification and equality within the female gender, and two, providing women with individual autonomy. So what have the government side actually said? We have told you how we can actually protect the minorities prevalent in women, how we can increase unification overall. We say that we take this narrative that propagates a mindset that makes them feel as though they're unable to live to the standards and those who are already structurally advantaged. In liberal progressive nations, minority women are still largely disenfranchised socioeconomically as compared to their white counterparts. This means that minority women are exclusively financially disadvantaged and they cannot live up to their women counterparts. Then, they never prove how girlboss culture managed to solve this. It just walks over this characterization that was uncharitable. They also gave their experience. They could also not get their experiences and struggles across to the public because of all the media focusing on the more successful girlbosses have actually made it just because of their well-off backgrounds. We see that opposition failed to address this in any point whatsoever. Okay, second, which side actually protects the individual autonomy of the woman? We see that girl boss is the term that clearly shows that women have to seek validation for them to be seen as equal. This does not empower them, but rather excludes a certain group of women that cannot rise to the top. We see that women then are not going to feel good about themselves because they cannot achieve it to such an extent. We, on the other hand, support a world where women do not have to seek praise from the term girl boss to succeed and for men to view them as equal. And this individual autonomy is much better as you view them as your own standard and rise to your own means. You do not have to subject yourself to the social standards of men, and you don't have to put yourself through so many struggles just because this kind of culture exists. What the opposition side said, the main thing that they get from the opposition side is this idea of empowerment. They've already told you how it's very unlikely for women to be truly empowered on their side, but let's be generous here. Taking their best case, I think the opposition will allow for empowerment. We see it still fails to address the core issues within society, and it is actually going to be the ones that keep the women down. This girl boss culture often works with the media, and since no media really wants to portray the struggles of women that females go through, we think this problem is solved as long as women get the top positions and are apparently successful. The opposition wants to protect this tokenism, furthermore, that comes with this narrative. However, they fail to address the detailed analysis of why it actually brings no benefits. We see that women are in CEO positions, sure, but there is going to be no change in sexual harassment. There's still going to be disproportionate amount of job opportunities offered to women, and so on. All these problems are still going to exist, no matter how many women are CEOs. No matter how successful these women are, people think that the problem is solved because they're in these high positions. We also need to note that the CEO does not necessarily allow for these women to make changes in the workforce environment. So most companies do not have a single CEO, so women can very easily be overpowered by the men in this position, and there are partners and associates that exist in every company, which means that they can very easily overpower the decisions that these women CEOs want to bring out. So overall, why is our alternative actually better? We see that we give individual autonomy. We're not subjected to what the men view, and there is no exclusion of certain women in the group. On the opposite side, they need to seek validation for the social standard of girl boss. And we see that even if it may take the best cases, say that empowering individuals itself, these inequalities still exist, and this does not impact feminism at all because they've not tackled the root issues of the patriarchal mindset of the men. At least on our side, we don't embrace a single word to dictate the worth of women all over the world, and actually embrace equality for everyone. We can also make sure that people are more unified because there's no toxic competition within these women. Girl boss, at the end of the day, is a word created upon a problem solution mismatch. It is simply ignoring the issue that will never bring and will lead to people ignoring the problem and it be brushed under the rug. For these reasons, we're so proud to propose. Thank you.